At the IAB, we've got 750 member companies, so we see all of this, and it's an extremely exciting time. The end of the digital beginning, I'm really intrigued by, actually, and we've been working with PwC since the last century, so it is a key point. Phil, a question for you, because you did talk about, well, I guess companies really looking at how they can transform their companies inside out for digital to really address it properly.
I think we're right at the beginning of that. I think some organisations have embraced that as a concept but don't quite know how to do it yet. So they're over the hurdle of saying actually digital is this thing on the side. They get the message that actually we may even have to stop talking about digital. We all need to come up to a certain level of understanding about what digital can do for us. So let's not say it's the clever people around the corner and the young people who are doing things in a different way to us. We all need to do this because this is about doing business. So it's at the formative stage, I would say, but I think we're over the most difficult hurdle of digital being a scary word.
Right, and the acceptance bit. But I guess a question to all three, actually. You know, a pure play company, let's say Amazon or something like that, they started out like that. You know, they're digital by design, aren't they? They work that way, so they haven't necessarily had the traditional baggage to sort out. But so, say from a MediaCom point of view, would you say that it's companies who are transactional by nature, for example, travel and finance, who have got to get it right, you know, on digital, because that's where, you know, up to half their business might be written, and so that they'll be having these sorts of conversations earlier, rather than, say, packaged goods companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think the digital, so coming from a media perspective, the digital, huge amount of digital growth, certainly online growth, has come from those types of companies, so financial organisations, telcos, anyone who's driving an e-commerce transaction. And I think that those people are those are the companies that have actually driven much of our innovation over the past 10 years. So they forced us as agencies to change the way that we do things, because a TV advert just doesn't cut it. We need to understand exactly how to make people purchase something online or on a mobile phone now, and what is the interplay between communications to take them down that funnel to go and do it. So they've had to change the way that they are as an organisation, and they've forced us to do so in the same way, which is fortunate for us. So I think in many, I mean, I've come from lots of different types of agencies. So I worked at a pure play digital agency before. We worked with really those types of clients, and I think as an agency you're defined in many ways by which clients you have, because they'll be at different points of evolution. They'll have very different types of needs. But if you can work with companies that are pure play in that way, you know, Amazon's a very extreme example of that. But companies that are driving a purchase in a digital channel, much of the time you'll be driven to be very innovative in what you're doing.
So you'll get some pretty interesting briefs from there. So Lee, you told a great story really about screens and how technology is moving, you know, from mobile and tablets. And from a publisher's point of view, but you then turned it on its head in terms of the advertisers and agencies as well. So a question starting with you really, is it, if an advertiser in the past, Phil, has been talking about, right, I need to work with an agency to get these ads out to the audience and it's all one way, do they now have to think a bit more like media owners, as if you know what I mean by that? So the advertiser then has to think, I'm actually making content and I'm interacting with the audience, answering their questions through customer service or creating content through social, and having to be interesting in new ways, acting a bit like Hearst, you know, does.
Absolutely. I mean, I think an advertiser, or if you're running an advertising campaign, you have to understand the touch points of where you can reach your customer and where you're going to be relevant. I think it's probably a turn-off for an audience if in their Twitter feed, which is quite a personal thing to a consumer, it's an entertainment medium. If ultimately the thing that's appearing in there is an advert that's not entertainment, it's going to turn people off. So it's not as easy as just being social. You have to understand where the touch points as an advertiser and as a media player.
Any other points on that?
Yeah, I loved that managed media thing. I should know it. I've never heard it before, and it's a terrible admittance. But I mean, it's exactly right.
You can copyright it, don't worry.
I will. It's exactly right. I mean, we've talked about paid, owned, and earned for a long time, and I think that you know, it's important to be able to give people something so that they'll talk about you in the right way, but try and manage that in a way, I suppose, as well. And I think that's what brands are trying to achieve at the moment.
Pay, don't, has that become a structure now? Sorry to interrupt you, but has that become a simple template to get into the minds of the agency and the advertiser? Well, we've got to cover off these bases, here's my 9 boxes? Or,
no, it's wrong to think like that, we've got to cover off the bases, but I think that it's important to be quite holistic in your approach to social media, for example.
Yeah.
So not just go out there and do a paid-for Facebook campaign without thinking about where you're directing them to and what you're asking them to do. So I think we do try to look at things in a paid, owned and owned way when we're thinking about social. You know, it's not the same thing for every. You're not always answering every brief in the same way, and there's no template. But I think trying to be holistic is important. Yeah.
This is about you. Like if you've got questions, you're thinking about questions, just please put your hand up and perhaps tell us who you are, where you come from, and ask questions. Please have you like. I've got loads. Before we do then, I'm going to go on to devices and penetration actually, because a lot of people talk about tablets and the Tableau. It's a great creative space now, and Lee, you showed the day part thing for 3 device lives, which actually showed that beyond 6 o'clock, you know, the tablet starts to take over. It's a leisure device. Looked at weekends as well. That's all over it. We know from data in the States and here that people are buying stuff on tablets, like much more than they are on smartphones if they've got one. So 2 questions really. Is tablets a game changer in terms of brand advertising and being able to audio-visual advertising in the brand sense onto a mobile device? And the other point is, Phil, it might be one for you, I don't know, but at the moment, say there's 10% penetration of iPads and tablets in the UK, you know, what does it have to be, you know, really to really grow?
So I'll answer the first question, I think. I find the dual screen thing very, very exciting, because I think TV actually is a very exciting medium still, and I think we see great advertising on TV, and I think there was always a lot of discussion around, as digital growth has gone up, that was going to cannibalise TV advertising, and I think that what tablets bring is a real complementary thing, in the same way that mobile brings a very complementary element to other media as well. But I think the whole social TV watching that comes with tablets and the advertising and communications opportunities for marketers is endless and very, very exciting. So for me, I think that's with my media head on. I think that's the bit that gets me very, as I keep saying, excited.
I think in terms of tablets have really opened up even beyond television. I think, from where the relationship with consumers was that if I want to go to on the internet in the evening, I'd have the power of a PC, almost by appointment, wait 20 minutes for it to come on, and blah blah blah. The tablet, I can sit there and put it over, and I can fire it on the tablet. It can respond to what's going on around me, so I can be in that community, in that communal space that is the living room in the evening. So it definitely opens up another challenge or reach people.
Sure. I think the really interesting thing about both the smartphone and the tablet is how they're much more tied to an individual than perhaps the PC in the household was. So in terms of targeted advertising, for example, yes, it's fantastic to know where I am with a GPS given site, but actually possibly the most important thing is you know it's me.
Yeah.
Because I don't give my smartphone to anyone else, whereas there's nothing more annoying to me when I'm sitting at home and I'm logging on to Amazon and I'm getting fired all the stuff that somebody else in my family has been looking for because they think it's me logging on again with the same IP address. It's much, much more personal when you get into the smartphones. What I was always amazed by was the stats that we had, that there were more internet-enabled phones in the world than there ever have been internet-enabled PCs, but the functionality wasn't turned on or the pricing mechanism for data wasn't there. We're in a position where we're beyond that. Well, we're beyond that now. And the only cautionary note I would say is I think this is a golden age for us as consumers because we're getting given this stuff for nothing in many cases, or people are trying out pricing methodologies. And it's a world where we're not paying for things that we were paying for 5 years ago, and there has to be a question as to whether we will need to start paying for them again if they're going to exist 5 years from now, because a number of the bits in the chain you could view as being broken, not least to deliver a lot of this stuff, you need the telco operators to invest an enormous amount of money in 4G. and yet they're not the people who are currently making the money from the chain. And so there is something about the redistribution of wealth across everything that we do in this industry to make sure that it's not only the consumer that's winning, because if it's only the consumer that's winning, there is no business.
Right. Has the tablet and mobile phone changed the dynamic of that a bit, in that are we more willing to pay for things like apps and so on than we would necessarily be online? That helps that model?
I don't think the needless has changed. I think what happens is there's a really efficient ecosystem to do it. It's very easy to pay. Yeah, iTunes is a really important one. Yeah, because you see that iTunes on the smartphone, there's a lot more transactions going on there than there is around on the Android platform.
Yeah.
I think it's driven by the ecosystem, not necessarily will pay for it.
Okay. So you don't think there's any habit there from, you know, the old days of playing for ringtones and games on smartphones that there's, you know...
I think there's a normalisation thing. I sort of mentioned normalisation before, and that people, if you not enforce, but if you give people a platform, to change their behaviour, they change it over time, and that becomes more of a normalised thing.
Yeah.
So that then it just becomes second nature just to go and buy something. And I think that's quite interesting, because I think you never know where we're going to be in 10 years' time, bearing in mind how much we've changed over the last 10 years in terms of the way we buy things on our mobile devices.
The producer is telling me that we have a question in the audience, and it's right here. Hello.
On that note about paying for services and also on the growing personalization of advertising, do you think that, I think that right now there is a certain wariness from consumers looking at the increasing personalization of advertising, particularly on mobiles. And my question is, do you think that in the future some consumers will choose to opt out of this growing personalization and perhaps pay for certain services in order to have like kind of like more anonymized data or more kind of like generalized, or just like removing some of these like advertising? Or do you think that consumers will just adjust as mobile advertising becomes more widespread? What are your opinions?
I think people will opt out. Some people will opt out, some people won't. I mean, I think really it's the advertising industry's responsibility to make sure that if you are targeting people through cookies or through behaviour, that you're doing so in a way that adds value to them. And so if you're personalising messaging, or you're deciding that you want to target that number, because it's never a person, but that number, you know, we have to control that, and it's our responsibility.
That's a very interesting question, actually, because I was listening to something on Radio 4, it's probably a repeat, it was the weekend, and there were 4 experts, and somebody from Colorado was saying, well, privacy is the biggest thing, you know, and actually he said, we're going to catch flu for the next 3 years, but then we're going to recover, and everybody's going to, here's his metaphor for, you know, there's going to be a hell of a lot of conjecture and fog about all of this, and a lot of worry and regulators going mad in Brussels and what have you, but actually we'll come out the other side because technology will out, you know, in the end, and because if there's a desire to get a piece of content, then actually, and it's done in the right way, as Josh suggested, then it should come right in the end. I mean, there's right now there's some methods which are not all that savoury, right? So
exactly.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, what about the inverse of that? You talked about the golden age for the consumer, and with consumers getting more and more accustomed to receiving things for free, and probably more sophisticated in the way that they exchange their data, being incentivised to engage with advertising. So I suppose the question is, what do you feel about incentivised advertising? How kind of advertisers feel about that?
Certainly, we do a lot of work around the world in terms of sitting at the consumer's level and saying how does it feel to be advertised at, rather than sitting at the advertising agency level saying this is a good thing, if we build it they'll come. And time again what we hear is that the market will dictate its own way of interacting with that advertising. So you'll get some people who will say, actually, I'm never going to pay for this content, but I realise there's an implicit bargain I have to make in order to do that. That if somebody's going to pay for that content to be made available, then I have to accept advertising that comes with it. And that's kind of an implicit bargain that they'll make. Or they'll say, actually, I want it ad-free, and I'm willing to pay for it. Or they'll do the even more difficult thing, which is go and try and find it for free, because they're time rich and cash poor, and then that's piracy. So it depends how you're going to go in that system. But I think we still see a real diversity of people saying, I am willing to give away privacy or private information in return for service, and other people who are saying, I will not give away my personal information. And we thought that that would equalise through age. Actually, it has nothing to do with age. It's more to do with individuals and their own personalities as to what they're willing to give away and what they're willing to receive. So I think the market is really quite difficult. What it means for advertisers is they have to work even harder to understand individuals.
But I suppose going one step further than the advertising itself, content being a reward,
Yep.
and actually into what has begun to happen, which is an actual exchange of value or product, or some material incentive to exchange data or eyeball time. Is that a growing
So
trend?
are you asking about whether consumers are incentivised to be, or can actually charge
to engage,
or to give their data away?
to give their time or their data or whatever it might be. There's the traditional view that content is the value exchange. So
I think that's
I'll give my time for the reward of the content someone's put money into. May go one stage further to actually I'll only give my time if I'm paid for it. Part of the golden age of consumer.
Okay, I'm not sure I see it in terms of being paid for it, but I do agree that actually there's a different value proposition which is capable, when you're tracking usage or interaction, you can actually work out which piece of the thing that you've just sold or put in front of a potential audience is the valuable piece to them, and maybe you contract in a different way, but you have to have the implicit bargain that you will share data in order to be able to have value delivered to you in a different way.
But ad servers for mobile has just in the last 2 years improved significantly and become a lot more sophisticated. I don't know I didn't realise the discrepancy. I have to say I didn't realise the discrepancy was as much as 50% between content owners and ad servers. Which, if I was an advertiser, I'd be worried about that myself. I'd recommend going with the ads.
It can be as much as. That's
Yeah, I mean that's sort of the topic, but I mean it's definitely more than online is at the moment, because online is more mature.
Yeah.
So all the sort of tracking is in place.
It's partly due to the technology, isn't it, and download speeds and what kind of device you've got and so on.
At the lowest level, it's a tagging issue. We're tagged at the bottom of the page rather than the top of the page. The consumer doesn't get to the bottom. It can be as simple as something like that, and that will be tuned over time. There's a responsibility probably within the media owners to make sure that we're reporting and being audited in which there are measures in place to do that. So I think ultimately it does come down to an implementation of technology we're talking about. And actually the mobile ad servers are not, as you say, mature as the web ad servers. Some of them tablet.
Yeah, for sure. Last year came before the IND, we did a whole directory for mobile ad serving, and I guess the experience with online, as you say, where discrepancies could be below 10, they can be ad operations and ad tech does eventually sort itself out. It's just been a rather painful period at the moment, I guess. I have no idea how long it's going to take to come right, but I
think there's things like container tagging, where ultimately you have one tag on your site and you feed in your various tracking pieces into that tidies that up, because you have one piece of information being passed to all those sources. So things like that will help that.
Yes.
Thank you. I want to pick up on the comment about age and different age ranges. I recognise, in terms of what I've heard tonight, I recognise that in terms of the adult world, maybe the world that all of us are in. When I look at my children, I don't see any of that behaviour that you're describing in there. I see a completely different profile of behaviour. I'm just really interested in your view on kind of that younger generation coming through, and other things we've spoken about here apply to the teenagers of the world now. Down to I've got a 9-year-old who would rather watch YouTube than TV, and TV is just not a concept that they're interested in. Really interested in your views on that.
I wish I could drag my two away from the Disney Channel. But they're on YouTube, they're on everything, they've got a couple of screens in front of them, so they're doing it in a different way. Actually, we did some work with a behavioural science lab that just said, because our view was, what are they doing? Because they can't be concentrating on all those things all at the same time. I know I can't. And actually, there's some brain research that says actually, no, they're not concentrating on all three, but actually if they've grown up with that sort of amount of stimulus in their brains, what they're really good is it's switching. So if something catches their attention, they'll switch out of one and into the other very quickly. But the behaviours point, when we started doing focus groups, I would sit in rooms of people with ages like us, and I would learn absolutely nothing, because they would talk about interacting with brands or advertising in exactly the same way that I would. But we stuck the 14 to 18-year-olds in a room, and it was a different language. I had no idea what they were talking about. They all had 4 phones because they were on different tariffs and they used them at different times of day, and they would do anything not to pay for content, and then very often, not even look at the content that they just got. It was there to be part of a lifestyle where they shared, and therefore the sharing, the acquisition was the most important thing. And what we very clearly looked at was to say, okay, these kids, they're time rich and they're cash poor, so are they doing all of that, and will they eventually grow into their parents? And it's been really clear over the 7 or 8 years we've been doing that actually the parents are turning into the children. But it happens at different stages for different people. But you've now got grandparents who are saying, well, I'll never pay for a newspaper, everything's online, and why would I do that? Which is filtered up through the demographics. So I think this is the big challenge for actually saying, how do you unlock and how do you say what the value for that young consumer is? And it's not that they're not interested in the content, because they're spending just as much time watching television or video content, or however you want to describe this thing which is being served to them. It's entertaining and they're spending a lot of time with it. The question is, what are they going to pay for? And that's the business models that are evolving.
Thank you. Interesting though, parents becoming more like the children.
No, yeah. I mean, I think all of that's true. I think the shareability aspect is key, certainly for teenagers. I mean, I've got a 2-year-old son on the interaction piece. And I just find it very interesting watching him. He can't look at anything audio-visual without expecting to interact with it. Yeah. He doesn't get it. Just, well, why
has everybody seen the videos of the 2-year-olds trying to flip photographs on the fridge?
It really is. But no, I mean they are going to define the way that we change, just in the same way that we define how our parents we're dictating how they behave now in terms of how they communicate and engage with media. So it's going to be very interesting. And on the YouTube bit, sorry, I have to say we're all going to be watching YouTube very soon. It's not just going to be your kids.
I think there's some common trends between generations, different trends, and life stages are relatively common. I think people kind of go through the life stages. So in your 30s you'll be type poor potentially because you've got a young family. That kind of thing will remain relatively common. What changes is the environment that's around you, and that kind of transcends life stages. So I think you'll find with Facebook, if you grow up with Facebook, you're used to having an online identity, whereas my parents' generation, why would you have an online identity? It just wouldn't be something that you would do, and you probably wouldn't. It's a medium that you wouldn't understand as such. So I think that as the environment changes, we all change slightly towards that environment. Largely life stages remain broadly the same.
Because it is internet, and arguably the barriers to entry are relatively low, there will always be, as the new technology develop, new startups which keep going through a cycle.
In answer to your question about consolidation, I do expect there to be consolidation. There's already a lot of consolidation. There will be further consolidation. I think it'd be fair to say that Google are just going and are trying to take ownership of every aspect of digital communication. Innovation in other areas continue though, and that there's going to be technical innovation is not going to stop. It's going to be around other areas. And, we don't actually know what the future of the media handheld things or whatever it is that we're going to be using are going to be. So it's very difficult to say. There's going to be there's a bottleneck or there's a ceiling on innovation. I think innovation will continue, but consolidation is you can see it already happening. You can see it in the Googles of the world. You can see it with the Facebooks of the world. You can see they get big, they get bought, they get big, they buy other people, they consolidate.
And do you think, in terms of the consolidation that's going on, you see the pure play tech players who know tech themselves are probably buying things that are vaguely sensible. Do you think some of the, maybe pick some of your point, do you think some of the older industries, let's take supermarkets for example, they're buying things left, right, centre, might be buying a few things a bit rash, a little bit out of desperation because it's cool to be digital?
I think there's a measure of that. I think there's a question of saying, if I grow this organically, how long is it going to take? but if I acquire it, things are very, very expensive. Which ones am I going to do? Inevitably, some people will buy the right things. Inevitably, people will overpay and it will be the wrong things, and that's business. That happens. I think what we've got is such a nascent industry around this that actually, if I could spot all the winners, I wouldn't be sitting here.
Yeah. I don't think wise buying necessarily is exclusive to technology. I mean, eBay bought Skype. You know, so and they, you know, so I think anyone can make mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're about to get to wrap up, but the sponsor would like to ask a question. It's a killer question.
It might be just an oddity, but I really like the slide about the 4 screens. And so one thing that I was kind of going on in my head thinking about the Olympics craziness, and how different 4 years ago was from this past Olympics and Paralympics. Sitting on the TV, watching Usain Bolt, and then suddenly pulling up Wikipedia and interviews with my son playing the Usain Bolt game on the iPad. Which types of content, and my sense is that some types of content that come up first on broadcast on TV will trickle down to the other 3 screens from the big one. But it won't always work the other way around, right? A blogger or a YouTube celebrity won't necessarily make the others. What are the rules of the game there, and how's it going to affect advertisers? And I mean, what do you guys think on that?
It's all about appropriate experience. It's absolutely. I don't. How do I put articles from Elle Vogue onto a smart TV? I don't know. I mean, yet. I think in terms of content creation, it's finding out what's appropriate for what medium. I think in terms of a smartphone, people use smartphones for certain things. They're in certain circumstances. So, as I said before, you're probably not going to give them lots of words to read. You might give them something that's more pictorial. You might give them something that's more game-based, because it's a very game-based medium. Same for tablet, that sits in certain scenarios. I think it's discovering what the appropriate content is for that medium.
But on a deeper level, like, what is the impact for celebrity, or what's newsworthy, or what will drive media? You know, because if you look at Bolt or Oscar Pistorius, it's like traditional advertisers, right? In the end, they're still benefiting from that. Whether they then ripple out to other mediums, right?
I've seen really quite good examples of, you're going to be watching the Olympics for a couple of hours, you know, but how long are you going to spend, you know, on this screen larking around with Usain Bolt? It might only be, you know, a minute, but the joint impact of that, and Lee talked about it, saying the loyalty that comes around through looking at it on telly or onto a magazine or onto an iPad or a phone is multiplied way more than just the 3 different devices that you've actually used. And I think we're going to see more measurement of that, you know, moving forward, which is going to help advertisers enormously. There's some very clever things, there's some crap things, but we're in that era, aren't we? Sorry, it's been a pleasure to moderate this panel, and some great stuff has come through. If you could thank Josh and Phil and Lee, I'm going to introduce you back to you, Chris. Thank you very much.
And we now have some wine waiting for you guys in the back. We have a group on LinkedIn, 2,500 people are connecting with each other, so if you don't find the right person to speak to tonight, maybe they're online, so when you connect tonight or tomorrow, whatever, find them there. And that's it from us. Thank you again, guys, for coming along.
Firsttuesday.org.uk. Don't network, be the network.